They don't want people to vote.
5 young men came and left without voting, but we came back, and now we have voted.
He took my ID and dropped it on the floor. He didn't want me to vote, but I kept coming back, and I voted in spite of his efforts.
People are still coming and voting patiently, whether they are voting with us or against us.
In the end, we have to support the resistance and vote with our conscience. We have principles.
Whatever they do, we will still vote, even if we have to stay all night until the morning.
Lebanon, 2009. In just a few weeks, the Lebanese will elect a new parliament. The elections are a tense race between the ruling pro-Western March the 14th alliance and the opposition March the 8th movement, allied with Syria and Iran. For many, the fate of Lebanon and peace in the Middle East depends on the outcome of this election, with Hezbollah leading the opposition. Hezbollah, the Party of God, a Shiite Islamist group, is regarded as a terrorist organization by the US and Israel, but as a resistance movement by a majority of the Arab and Muslim world. Why do so many people of different ideologies and political views support this religious party with the strongest militia in the world? How can a paramilitary group participate in a free and democratic vote? What will happen if Hezbollah wins the election? And what will be Lebanon's fate if they lose? In Babda district, suburban Beirut, preparations are underway for an election rally. The rally marks the start of the campaign for Hezbollah candidate Ali Ammar.
This is the first day of the campaign. We have been ready for today for a long time now.
What kind of people are you expecting?
It's more like a family, neighbors and friends event. This is like a big family, a home with an open door all the time.
Will Christians attend the meeting?
Of course. They're our associates in the country and part of our family.
This is the first time a Western camera has been allowed deep inside the closed community of Hezbollah. This film will reveal the strong views and passionate opinions of Hezbollah and their supporters. These opinions will not be shared by all sides. But perhaps, by seeing why one side fights, we can have a clearer understanding of the conflict. Made up of 18 religious communities, the political and electoral system of Lebanon is divided on sectarian lines. Before the civil war began in 1975, Lebanese Christians were in the majority, and most did not consider Lebanon an Arab country. But in 1990, the Taif Agreement that ended the civil war officially recognized Lebanon as an Arab state and divided the number of parliamentary seats equally between Christians and Muslims. The Babda district is a stronghold of Shiite Hezbollah, but also includes Christian and Druze areas dominated by political opponents of Hezbollah.
The 6 candidate seats in the district are distributed in the following way. 3 seats for the Maronites, 2 seats for the Shiites, and 1 seat for the Druze. We feel comfortable predicting wins for the Change and Reform bloc in most areas of the Babda district because it focuses on a unified, cohesive political vision. Regrettably, the other team insist pretty much on exercising the art of intimidating and threatening the Lebanese people. Hezbollah believes it is impossible for any group or element to govern Lebanon alone. Whatever religion or whatever sect it is affiliated to. It believes in the need to preserve the principle of partnership and the decision-making level among the communities within the Lebanese society, because this is governed by the nature of the Lebanese structural makeup, which is the work of God, praise and exalt him, and not the work of any earthly person.
In the coming elections, Ali Ammar's district is crucial. Hezbollah must gain support from more than just the Shiite community to avoid losing face in its historic heartland. In the heart of Hezbollah's homeland, called Haret Hareik, there is a Christian church.
I am here because I never felt a connection to any other church. This church was closed for 17 years because of the civil war, and for 17 years I never felt any connection to any other church.
And you come here every Sunday?
Yes, every Sunday, since the day it reopened.
Those who complain and disagree, I have one thing to tell them. Haret Hareik is our birthplace. Thanks to the presence and efforts of our father here, God bless him, who reopened the church for us, and when we die, he will take us to the cemetery over there. This is our birthplace. It's our destiny.
It has no effect at all. The situation within this close community is not affected by political, religious or military situations. No effect at all. This is quite natural, really. These factors only affect individuals who are either fanatics or ignorant. Normal people are not affected. Haret Hareik is a community where everybody lives side by side in peace and harmony. Muslims and Christians in unity, and the community will continue to exist for that purpose. Every Sunday, the priest performs his duties. People come to see him from Haret Hareik and beyond. Everybody gathers in the square before the service to see the priest, and will stay on after he has left.
The fact that you are a Christian mayor for a town with an overwhelming Muslim majority, does that in any way hinder your role?
We don't have any religious divide in Haret Hareik. I can honestly say that. The presence of Hezbollah in Haret Hareik has no negative influence. We never mention or consider religious differences. You can say that since the start of the presence of Hezbollah in Haret Hareik, when they set up in Haret Hareik and started taking care of the civil matters and imposing order, the security problems disappeared. Problems that existed before, such as armed militia from any faction, patrolling the streets and attacking any citizen they liked, without any intervention from the government. Once such problems had been eradicated, order and stability were restored from that moment on.
Our religion is the essence of our policy, and our policy is the essence of our religion. A thorough religious commitment, according to the Islamic understanding, would be meaningless if not paired with jihad, as well as with social and political work.
Hezbollah runs more than a dozen hospitals and clinics, 12 schools, and 2 agricultural centers that provide farmers with technical assistance and training. Jihad al-Bina's reconstruction campaign is responsible for economic and infrastructure development projects. The Martyrs Institute, Al-Shahid Social Association, provides living and education expenses for families of fighters who die in battle.
We call for a strong, potent and just state, but this does not mean that we must be weak. A strong state is one that owns the factors of strength, equipping the Lebanese army, for example, which is not our responsibility. A strong state must care about the citizens' affairs wherever they are. It must maintain security and deploy police forces. It must also punish offenders and establish justice.
In 1982, in the middle of civil war, when Israel had invaded South Lebanon and the PLO was operating out of Beirut, Hezbollah was created.
There used to be a sporadic Islamist activity in Lebanon before the creation of Hezbollah. It was led by a number of scholars who acted as instructors and educators, as well as religious leaders. Later, the different Islamic parties were resolved and integrated into a unique party called Hezbollah.
Between 1982 and 1986, there were 36 suicide attacks by 41 individuals in Lebanon, directed against American, French and Israeli forces, killing 659. Hezbollah has been accused of some or all of these attacks, but denies involvement in any.
We as Hezbollah believe in jihad, but we believe in jihad only in fighting Israel and no other side in the world, not even those who disagree with us intellectually, or atheists, whereas some Islamic movements would kill anyone who disagrees with them, be it Muslims or non-Muslims, calling them disbelievers, and this is a huge difference. Jihad in Islam is not an aggressive war, it is defensive and preventative. And this was repeatedly stated in the Quran. Truly, Allah likes not the transgressors. And if they incline to peace, incline thou also to it.
Hezbollah drew most support from South Lebanon, home to a majority of Shiite Muslims, with Beirut to the north, Syria to the southeast, and the disputed border with Israel at its southern edge. In another electoral region of South Lebanon, Sarafand, a Shiite village with a considerable secular population, the local association allied with Hezbollah to fight the historic strength of the Amal movement. Dr. Amel Karoubi was selected for the association's candidate list for the first real municipal elections in Sarafand.
Now they give you the excuse of one's fear of the other. Because you fear the Christian, support the Muslim. Because you fear the Sunni, support the Shiite. This is our actual present reality.
This country has long been divided on sectarian lines. But since the assassination of Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri in 2005, the political communities in Lebanon have divided into two clans, the March the 8th and March the 14th movements. The March the 14th group holds a majority in parliament. It's named in memory of their success on the 14th of March 2005, when Syrian forces were removed after 15 years of occupation. Their objective is the disarmament of Hezbollah, in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution that calls for the disarmament of all Lebanese and Palestinian militias. The March the 8th opposition consists of two major Shiite parties, Hezbollah and Amal, the Christian General Aoun parties, who predominate in the north of Lebanon, Druze, communists, socialists, and others. The March the 8th group unites the parties who oppose US domination, accusing the Americans of plotting to get their hands on the region's resources. But the major issue that divides these two clans is the question of their conflict with Israel. The March the 14th group opts for diplomatic solutions and wants to end all forms of military conflict with its neighbor. The March the 8th movement claims the only way to face Israeli aggression and liberate the remaining occupied Lebanese territories is armed resistance.
In the early 1920s, the Zionist movement attempted to set up colonies. They bought land to build colonies in South Lebanon. It was thought that the region of South Lebanon was important from a strategic point of view, because it was high, and also from an economic point of view, as it was a region rich in water. And because of this, it was important for the national Jewish heartland to annex this region. As time went on, South Lebanon became the front of confrontation between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli army.
In Lebanon, ethnicity and religion are part of your identity. They're even printed on your identity card. Amel, studying for a PhD, met a Frenchman.
Amel called me from France to say she had met someone. I told her what matters most is her happiness. Once she finished her PhD, we would have been happy to accept any guy she picked, either Lebanese or a foreigner, Muslim or Christian, or even Jewish. But we didn't expect to have a Jewish son or brother-in-law.
I was born in Paris. My father was Parisian, but with a Jewish background, ethnically speaking, since he was called Levi.
But the problem was Mum. It was hard for her at first. She said she couldn't accept something against our religion. I told her, our religion is the good treatment of humanity. This guy can treat my sister better than any guy from any other religion. She said she couldn't meet him without wearing a hijab or shake hands with him in her house. That was against her religion.
I wasn't aware he was Jewish or anything. They told me he was French. It was something new to me when I learned the origin of his ancestors was Jewish and so on.
During the war, one day my grandfather, who I never knew, went out. My father was 14, and he did not return. And as far as we know, it was obvious he'd been picked up in a raid. So it didn't take much to guess what had happened in the end. From what my grandmother told me, I think that he would have not necessarily approved of the creation of the State of Israel, since he always thought of himself as being French first. I think that he would have had no desire to return to Israel. He was well established. He had his jewelry business at that time around Paris. For him, his life was all about being French. End of story.
Thierry has been living in Lebanon for 5 years, so he's seen the territorial and sectarian conflict at first hand.
Perhaps it's fortunate I am not Lebanese, so perhaps I have the freedom to be able to say what I think and to actually write something by saying, I'm a witness in Lebanon alongside Hezbollah. It's also to avoid labels that I could be stuck with. I am called Thierry Levi, so that's hardly neutral. It's already a label. So just as in the book, does it mean that by having the name Levi, I should be obliged to support Israel?
Tonight, Thierry is at a press conference to launch his book, a collection of testimonies from people affected by the conflict with Israel.
He says that secularity will never happen if religious leaders are not there to actively encourage it, and he gives Hezbollah a role to bring about the concept of secularity in the construction of the state. But I'm certain that people will put me down as pro-Hezbollah. So I'm just trying to show in my book that it's a little more subtle than that. There is a need to go and meet people, and afterwards, you often take a pragmatic view. So that leads me to say that we should not demonize Hezbollah, but we should neither demonize those who are anti-Hezbollah.
I believe in universalism. That's why I've gone for this book. And particularly when the Middle East is reduced to factions. That upsets me a lot.
I hope at least it can serve as an opening for Jews in France. Perhaps I want to get through to them first, and then by extension to others, to say that it's possible to be a Jew without necessarily sharing the ideology of Israel.
In Babda district, candidate Ali Ammar is leaving his hidden secure office at the start of a long day of campaigning.
So, in Babda there are Sunni and Shiite Muslims, and there are various Christian sects. There are Armenians and some minorities such as Assyrians and Syriacs. Add to this some Greeks and also the Honorable Druze community, the Unitarian Druze. There are also a small number of Jews, so the Babda district represents Lebanese diversity. It truly represents Lebanese ethnic identity.
He's traveling to a Druze area of Babda, where the majority support the party led by Walid Jumblat. In addition to Israeli threats against Hezbollah's officials, Druze and Hezbollah animosity has flared up into violence in the past. So for his own safety, Ammar must travel in a securely guarded convoy. Hezbollah did not take sides in the civil war, but focused on their fight against Israel. After the war, they continued that fight, but there were major changes within the factions that were involved in the internal conflict. Disputes about territory continued, but subsequent events brought South Lebanon to the world's attention. Qana, South Lebanon. Many Christians believe this is the site of the wedding where Jesus turned water into wine.
المعجزة الأولى التي فعلها يسوع في قانا